Let's have this conversation with Nick Agule, an energy expert, on the developing story about the over 200% hike in electricity tariff. Very warm welcome to News Night.
Thank you very much, sir, and good evening to our viewers globally.
Thank you very much. What kind of social disconnect will this over 200% increase in electricity tariff have on the nation?
It's going to have a lot of economic and social effects. Let's not forget that Nigerians are experiencing a lot that is being thrown at them. First, we had the removal of petrol subsidies, and then we had the forest unification, and then we'll have the interest rate increases, and then now we have this electricity tariff that is being removed. And each and every of these policies have an effect on the people's pockets eventually. And so it's hard, and it's still going to be very hard for Nigerians. And what I would say is, and I've said this directly to our president, President Tinubu, is that yes, these economic policies are being put in place for our good, but when you are performing a surgery, you need to apply anesthesia. If you don't have an anesthesia applied, you could actually have your patient killed on the operating table. So it's really difficult, and the government now needs to do their own side of the bargain.
Yeah, the government is saying that well over 1 trillion naira is going to be saved, and that probably would help accelerate increasing power generation, distribution, transmission of the power, which has been a major problem over the last 30-40 years. And if government says it's going to save so much, is it too difficult for the people to continue to endure for a better tomorrow that the government says it's a renewed hope for tomorrow?
I think Nigerians are already paying way too much for electricity. I can give authoritative data about the UK, where I pay electricity bill as well. And the average cost of electricity per kilowatt hour in the UK is about 25 pounds. And that is for a minimum wage of about 2,000 pounds. So a UK minimum wage earner can afford to buy 8,000 units of electricity with his pay. A Nigerian minimum wage earner at 30,000, and I have to talk about this 30,000 carefully because there are some states that are yet to even implement it.
Yeah.
Can only afford about 450 units of electricity at the current tariffs that we have. So that is to say that we're already paying too much for electricity. The problem in Nigeria is that sometimes our policymakers grab problems at far downstream instead of looking at them upstream, meaning the causative factors. What is the causative factor that has resulted into this? Because if you speak to the Minister of Power today, he will tell you that the biggest problem in the electricity sector is liquidity. But we have forgotten to understand that we're talking about 3,000 megawatts. Perhaps I need to give some statistics of comparable economies like ours to see how poor we are energy-wise.
Very poor indeed.
Exactly. Brazil, that has a similar population like ours, 200 million plus people, they are supplying 180,000 megawatts per day. I don't want to talk about an advanced economy like the UK because that's 730,000 megawatts. But let's look at a small place like Qatar. Qatar and Nigeria mirror each other because we are both gas-rich nations. And as we speak today, gas is powering 70% of electricity that is being generated globally.
Why is it difficult? Sorry. Nick, why is it difficult to get the power situation right in Nigeria? Let me give you an example. Sapele, for example, has 2 power stations, but Sapele is in darkness 24 hours. They don't see light. One is gas, the other is hydro.
Okay.
What is the problem? Why is Nigeria not getting it right?
Very good question. Very, very good question, and I hope the policy makers are listening to us, or they will listen to us. The problem of electricity in Nigeria is simple. We are simply generating and supplying way too little electricity for this economy. I was about to talk about Qatar. There are 2.8 million people. It's 12,000 megawatts of electricity. So imagine 2.8 million people enjoying 4 times the electricity of 200 million people. Because what translates into the unit cost of electricity is the total cost divided by the quantity supplied. Now, total cost has been rising, let's not forget. Because from one NEPA, we now have so many GENCOs, the transmission company you see there, and so many DISCOs, all on the same denominator of 3,000 megawatts. So as cost is rising, and let's not forget that a lot of these DISCOs took foreign loans to buy their licenses. And these loans were at 150 naira. Today they are having to pay them at 1,000 plus naira. Bringing all those costs into their books, and then next says, well, we have to have cost reflective tariff. And they are forcing this cost, escalated cost, down the throats of Nigeria by hiking the tariffs. So why are we still on 3,000? The answer is simple. The government is still straddling the electricity sector. If the government gives way, the way they did in telecoms, and allowed real telecoms operators like the MTNs to come in, the power situation in Nigeria will begin to improve.
We have private, like Geometrics, for example. 180 megawatts. You have Mabon Energy in Garden Koa. I think that's about 40 megawatts. It can serve the whole of the Northeast. I wonder if that electricity is being evacuated yet. But Geometric has, a very copious plan. So it does not supply to the national grid, except if you want. It's enough to, more than enough for the Southeast. So why are we not using such, private investors?
It's a big opportunity that you are describing. And we thank President Tinubu for signing into law the Electricity Act, which now makes it possible for states and the subnational government, states and local governments, and even private sector to generate and supply electricity where there is national grid and where there's no national grid. Before that act, you couldn't do that where there was national grid. So states should pick up the pace, set up their own regulatory regimes. In fact, they first need to enact laws to domesticate the act in their states, and then set up their regulators, and then open up the space. But let's not forget that as we speak today, the lowest hanging fruit in the electricity sector is the infrastructure that we have already. And this infrastructure, as our viewers will know, is distribution, transmission, and generation, transmission, and distribution. Generation is being privatized largely. Distribution privatized largely, even though not very correctly. The bottleneck in the electricity sector that is pinning us down to 3,000 megawatts is the transmission, which is still completely in the hands of government. Government needs to give way, either to commercialize it or to privatize it. I hear people who say, we cannot privatize our transmission for security reasons. And I ask the question, between electricity and telecoms, which one has more security exposure for us? Because our president is using MTN or Agule. The National Security Advisor or the service chief, they are using private sector provided phones. And yet we privatized it. So what is the big deal of releasing transmission? You know why? Generation cannot generate what transmission cannot carry. So generation is limited, totally hampered. Distribution cannot distribute what transmission does not give them. So this transmission that is sitting in the middle is a clear bottleneck. And the area President Tinubu says, look, we need to take decision on this transmission. We are going to remain on this 3,000 megawatts, unfortunately.
What a shame. And labor is gearing up, tying its loins for a nationwide strike over this hike in electricity tariff. Is that not going to create another massive distortion in the economy? Manufacturers are groaning, they are shutting down, unemployment is rising, the hike is even more than the inflation rate and the rest.
Exactly. So it's going to cause more pains, because look at what Nigerians are dealing with. I have already laid it out. So basically, the governments across Nigeria, federal, state, local government, need to come to one realization. If we don't give enough power to this economy, there's nothing that can be done that this economy will do well. Absolutely nothing. Power is the life, is the blood to an economy, a 21st century economy like Nigeria's. A body that does not have enough blood will never do well, regardless of what the doctors do. I think if the president and the governments at the subnational level come to this realization, we will then say 3,000 megawatts is too small electricity for Nigeria. And then the other problem I want to talk about is, we talk about generation, gas supply to generation. That shouldn't be a problem. Why? Because as we speak today, Nigeria is flaring gas. The oil companies produce gas and they are flaring it. So if they are flaring gas, then why are we talking about gas supply? They should simply just channel the gas that they are flaring into power plants. It's even better that they channel it for free than to flare it, because they are paying the government to flare the gas.
Absolutely.
So why would the government be taking money from oil companies to flare our gas when this gas is what we need to generate this electricity and move Nigeria from this beggarly, miserly 3,000 megawatts to at least 30,000 megawatts to start talking about electricity? You're
right. And a concerned Nigerian is just asking that, how do you build street lights or street lightings? Who pays?
Yeah, so in terms of street lighting, this is in the control of government. So you see, like in the UK,
the same government establishments that are owing the distribution companies billions and billions of naira. Look at UCH. UCH has been, comatose, no light for over a fortnight now.
Yeah.
And
okay, so when people talk about the distribution companies, people owing them, the liquidity issue, because in the whole value chain from generation to transmission to distribution, it's the distribution companies that take the money and pay themselves, pay transmission, pay generation back that way. So if they don't take money, there's liquidity problem. This liquidity problem is caused by the generation companies. Why? Look, if you go to a place like the UK, nobody can steal your electricity. Nobody can enjoy your electricity without paying for it. You know the reason? Because electricity cables are buried under the ground, deep under the ground. And burying them under the ground means if you don't pay for it, they don't even need to bring a ladder to come and start switching off your light. They will switch it off right there in their office, forcing you to pay them. And because they are buried underground, they are insulated from the elements. You cannot have a breeze or wind knock down poles, or vehicles knock down poles, or people come to steal electricity cables and things like that, making power supply to be more stable. The distribution companies in Nigeria are not doing that. Why? Because we sold these licenses to politically exposed people, not real power players who have the money, the technology, and the expertise to do it. So that's another area President Tinubu needs to look into the distribution licensing. Either he forces their hands to enter technical partnerships with those who can do it, or just takes these licenses from them and gives it to people who can do it.
To re-auction?
Exactly. Do re-auction and give it to people who can expand the distribution network.
Why don't they just get new investors in to, since there is already decentralization in the power sector?
They can do it. You see, there is no investor that will ignore Nigeria. 200 million people on a land size that is 4 times the United Kingdom. Who ignores that?
Very quickly, before we let you go, the vagaries in the tariff application, band A, B, C, E, and the rest, for 48 hours now, I've been running on generator. At the end of the day, like I mentioned, the Sapele that has 2 generating plants and no lights, they still bring bills to them.
Yeah.
Would they still bring bill to such persons? On what basis?
They shouldn't bring bills, but let me be very honest with Nigerians. At 3,000 to 4,000 megawatts that we are generating and supplying to the entire Nigeria, because that should be power for only Abuja. There is no way you can give 20 to 24 hours of that 3,000 megawatts to some people and then have to give to others. It's simply not enough. See, this 3,000 megawatts is power for an industrial park elsewhere. It can never, I gave the data for Brazil, 180,000. So let us say our population and Brazil is the same. Let Brazil be doing 180,000, even if we're doing 50,000. First, the unit cost of electricity that NEC is forcing down the throats of Nigerians now will drastically come down. It will be a fraction of what it is now, because the denominator of that fraction will rise. So there's absolutely no way. This thing that they are saying, I think, is on paper. Once you give electricity for 20, 24 hours to some areas, you're not going to have enough to give to other people. But they are still going to bring bills. Why? They have cost they need to meet. So the president needs to come here, because monetary policy that the central bank is doing is not going to work. Fiscal policy is not going to work. Changing Minister of Finance is not going to work if we are on 3,000 megawatts. Don't forget, we've brought in the likes of Okonjo-Iweala. And nothing has happened, because the real problem is 3,000 megawatts is simply too small electricity for Nigeria, and until it grows to at least 20, 25, 30,000, this economy is not going to do well.
Thank you so very much, Nick Agule, an energy expert, for coming to shed light on the developing story in the hike in electricity tariff in Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you very much.